Welcome to the Water People podcast, where we talk story with some of the most adept waterfolk on the planet. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. For us, the podcast is about diving into the aquatic experiences that really shape who we become back on land. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people, including elders, past, present, and emerging. Today we're in conversation with artist, surfer, and devoted dad, Chris Del Moro. Chris spent more than a decade as a professional free surfer, featured in movies including Sliding Liberia, The Present, and the biographical Bella Vita by Jason Baffa, which explores his Italian heritage and the blossoming culture of Italian surfing. Chris has also worked closely with environmental organizations like Surfers for Cetaceans, combining art and activism to help protect wild species and wild spaces. Chris is now the co-owner of Bag Sue Jules with his wife Maggie, and is the creative director for Drifter Surf in Bali. At the time of recording, they've been traveling the Southern Hemisphere for nearly a year with their two boys, Marley and Bodhi, aged 4 and 7. We caught up with Chris during the 3-month leg of their Australian adventure.
Chris Del Moro came onto my radar in the surfing world many years ago because of his multi-skilled personality. And at that point in time, I remember really getting a kick out of meeting surfers who are, obviously very adept, very skilled in the water, though also had other things happening in their life that enabled their surfing to have a lot of freedom around it, not too much stress. And so with Chris, that freedom and inspiration came in the form of graphic art, really amazing skills in terms of drawing and lettering and, massive murals, all kinds of stuff. And he was applying that skill wherever he could to help others or help animals or help spaces.
And isn't that inspiring for any of us who have a skill that maybe feels a little superfluous, just knowing that you can use what you have to contribute in the ways that you can.
And you think about superfluous, like what is more superfluous in the modern world than a surfer, a professional surfer, a professional free surfer? It's just like, how is that useful and meaningful in the world? And that was our challenge at that time, was to try and make it meaningful and to try to be less self-centered and hedonistic. And so at that point, I had a lot of environmental projects and campaigning happening, and I really was hoping to enlist other surfers of notoriety in the surfing world because they would be able to share information with other surfers that they knew around the world. They could break codes of silence on issues, like for Japan, for example. A lot of surfers we knew there didn't know anything about mercury and heavy metal poisons and toxicity in cetacean meat that was being consumed by children in the school lunch program system there. But we knew about it in Australia, New Zealand, America, and that just didn't feel right, knowing Japanese surfers were in the dark about that. So that was really something that Chris and I and many other people involved with our group at that point in time really worked towards, which was breaking that code of silence. It was about opening up lines of communication, and Chris is such a great communicator. He's such an honourable man. He's so creative. He's quite a Renaissance man. He puts his hand to anything and it usually works out okay. And he's...
and always safely.
And always safely, yes. He's very conscientious and caring for other people's well-being. And all of those things just, really make him a man among men. He's a man. Yeah. He's not a little boy. He's not stuck in some Peter Pan idea of things. When we were all together, the surf's pumping, his wife is sick, his kids are sick. He doesn't even bat an eyelid. He just will bend over backwards to help his family, forget about the pumping waves that he's missing out on, and he'll just be a great dad and a good friend.
I witnessed that happen. Maggie, Chris's wife, was really unwell, and he was about to jump off the rocks to go surfing on a day that was
pretty stellar.
Beautiful, spectacular winter day. He reversed off the rocks, got the call, took your car, went back home, and took care of her for the day. And I was just thinking, I don't think either of us would have done that for each other.
I'm really grateful that you said either of us. Thought you were just going to say, definitely wouldn't do that, David.
You wouldn't have, and I might not have either.
Oh, that's good. High five.
Good match.
Yeah.
I love Chris because he is solid.
Yeah.
He is just reliable, and we talk about this in the chat, steadfast. And I feel like you have to prove yourself to get in with Chris. He is, in a way, kind of like a cat. You have to earn his his acceptance, you know? The people who are in Chris's inner circle are there pretty much forever. It seems like he has lifelong best friends. And I don't know that many people who have lifelong best friends anymore. And he does. People that he still spends time and a lot of energy with and on. And I just love that about him. It's so telling of the way he values loyalty, and what an underrepresented characteristic these days. I feel like culture sort of encourages us to be a lot of things, you know, unique and special and stand out and make your way and whatever, be an entrepreneur. And then there are lots of other ways to be in the world. And Chris is an example of one of those other, just very solid, very focused, very multi-skilled in his own particular ways. And he uses those ways for the good of his family and the good of the living world, which is what I really admire about him too.
Yeah. And, you know, it's one of those things where your friends, you can go on and on and on about all those wonderful attributes and the reasons we're all such great friends, but we should probably stop and start the conversation, because it's great to hear from the man himself and to dive into how his surfing life, how his ocean-centric life has evolved, and how it has gone from a little long-haired, blonde-haired little surf rat in Southern California to many, many other new and exciting adventures and directions, and parenting and business and conservation work and land work. And I hope people enjoy this, because he is someone who is part of the surfing timeline over the last, say, 10, 20 years. A lot of people know who Chris is, but like you said, he's not an open book for everyone. And so this is a really great window into what makes Chris Del Moro tick.
We begin these conversations in the same place each time by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Do you have a moment like that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, definitely. That's such a loaded question. I've been thinking about that, and obviously listened to many of the podcasts previous, and love what everyone has said. And there's so many ways, obviously, the day you're married, watching your children born at home, and there's so many things. You're never the same after. But the thing that really has kind of dropped into the zone that feels like I've never been the same after, and especially relevance toward my life with the ocean, would be this summer when I was 8 years old. So I grew up in a split home and in split countries. So I would spend my summers in Italy, and then I would spend the school year in California with my mother, and I'd go to my dad in the summer. And my mom was just a champ. I mean, my mother's the most lovely woman on the planet, and I got so blessed with her. And she just was doing whatever she could as a single mother at the time to make a better life for us. And we were living in my grandfather's apartment, my grandmother and grandfather's apartments. It was a good life. I mean, we had family right next door. My grandparents were next door, and a lot of family around. But it was a tough place and a tough era to grow up. It was the 80s. We were in the Port of Los Angeles. I just recall my whole experience with school was so terrifying. I was first having to learn English through a Hispanic ESL program. And then once I got there, I was comfortable enough where I knew the language. And then it was just a lot of really hard characters and hard kids. And it was a big school. So it started, pre-K and went all the way to 8th grade. And the 8th graders are like, where I grew up at the time, and there was a lot of like gangbangers and just gnarly stuff, drug deals and fights, and just saw so much radical stuff in a short time as a child. And it was so urban, my setting. And my mom, to make a better life for us, she had this epiphany and this download from a chiropractic adjustment that she had. And that was her calling. And she wanted to be a chiropractor. So she went to Cleveland Chiropractic School, which is up in downtown LA, which was about an hour, depending on the traffic or more. So I would get dropped off around 5 o'clock in the morning at a LA Unified childcare facility that was next door to the main campus. And so I would do my breakfast and my whole morning ceremony with this, like, what I recall, it was a prison. I mean, it was like a bunch of kids and 15-foot chain link fences around us in an alley.
And you were 5.
This would have been starting kindergarten, 1st grade, and 2nd grade. So whatever ages.
5, 6, 7.
5, 6, 7. That's right. So I was little, and like, I was just thinking about it last night, that it was a square, this little piece of property. It was a square, and on one side it was all an alley all around it, and then one side was the main road. And the alley was the back of a bar, and then the back of a 7-Eleven, and then a hair salon, and then like a public office building and stuff. And some of the things I saw go down in that alley were just like so radical and stay with me like so vividly. Crazy after school fights and just homeless people. I mean, just radical stuff, Yeah. I just remember, I really disdain that period in my life, the school part. And then I would go to school all day, and then I would be in aftercare program, and she would come and pick me up in the dark. So I'd be there from dark to dark. And I'm not obviously whinging. It just was tough. And my mom was doing the best she could. And I think I understood that. So I just went with it. And there was obviously great women. It was all women that ran that facility, and they gave us a lot of love, and it was the best that it could be for that place. And then one summer I went to Italy, and then that was just like completely extract me out of the SoCal, LA Harbor, tough vibe, and take me to the most quintessential European dream scene with, a loving grandmother and family. And my dad lived in the country. It was just so different. It was like 2 different polar opposite worlds. It was tough. I obviously enjoyed my time over there, but leaving your mom, and she's like my rock, for 3 months at a time. And my dad's had a new partner. So it's just like getting all this change. There's so much change, right? And at the time, I was like more of an urban kid. Like my family, we went to the beach, and we obviously, that was part of our life, but it wasn't like the driving force. Like I was into like skateboarding and BMX and more like urban city stuff, Nintendo, TV, all this stuff that nowadays I'm like,
that all of us grew up with.
That we all grew up with, canned soup and like stuff that I'm just not.
Happy Meals.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I recall vividly the time my mom, we talked on the phone, which was very rare. You barely got to talk because it costs an arm and a leg. It was a fortune to talk on the phone back then, but it was like, a 5-minute, like really concise. I love you. I miss you. This, and so-and-so had a baby. And then she went, and I have really good news. And I was like, what? She said, when you get back, we're not living in the apartments anymore. I'm like, where are we going? She said, well, Len and he invited us to move in. And this was my mom's, at the time, new boyfriend. And there had been a couple, and they'd been total dorks. And Len was like knight in shining armor that just came in and just treated my mom from day one like absolute legend and gentleman. And it's just the man. And he, within I would say 4 or 5 months of them dating, he invited us to come live with him. And she told me, when you get back, you have a room at his house on the beach. And it was, at the time, it was like just a humble little fisherman shack, an old, beach cabin, but panoramic ocean views, walking distance to the sand. And I was like, you're joking me. And she said, no, he gave you the guest room. That's going to be your room. And we're moving, and you're going to a whole new school district, and everything's changing. And she was so excited. And I was so excited. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So I come home from Italy. The apartment's gone. I didn't have anything to do with the moving. And all of a sudden I just come in. My mom had already set my room up. Just like, you got to be kidding me. And that day, that move changed my life more than I would say just about anything, because it instantly opened up the world of the ocean to me. And I feel like had more effect on me as who I am currently than just about anything I can think of. And I just from that night forward, I listened to the rumble of like boulders and swells come and go. And we could even hear whales at nighttime. I mean, it was like seals calling.
Was that to the PV house?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The same house that you got to know, but became a completely different home. They renovated when I left the house at like 17 or whatever, 18. And it was just such a huge shift in my life and such a blessing. My stepfather, who really just stepped in as my dad, Len, he was like such a blessing to my mom and to me, and then ended up giving us Cassidy, my little sister, down the track, many years down the track, and just shaped who I am and really gifted me the ocean. And from that day forward, I was just like completely obsessed. And I had at the time my auntie lived right down the street in the same community. I could just walk to her house. And she had my two cousins, Misha and Joshua, who were older. So they always had me under their wing. They got me into boogie boarding right away. And so I got my first Mach 7.7, and I was just pulling into closeouts as much as I could. And I can just remember. And then right underneath them was my best friend, and who I call my older brother, Oliver. And Ollie and I have been inseparable since we were little boys. And then a bunch of other neighborhood kids, and surfing was the language. Biking, sure, you did it when it was flat or windy or cold or whatever, and you skateboarded a little too. But like surfing that's who we lorded. We idolized all the best surfers in our town, the guys with the fluorescent purple to pink, yellow sprays that were doing carbon 360s in the early 90s. And my life just instantly got drive and passion, and I just became so fixated with the art of surfing and all of it. Like I can remember, I don't quite know, maybe just my curiosity, or I'm not exactly sure why, but I just always loved all of it. I liked swimming, I liked bodyboarding. And then once I did a summer where I recycled all summer and made like $86 or something at the time. And then my cousin's like, all right, I think that's enough money. We went down to the local surf shop.
Do you mean like you were taking cans back to the dump or something?
Yeah, I was going through all the remnants of the beach parties and taking all the glass and then the cans, and then I would bag them. And then my aunt was cool enough to let me stash them all in her yard, on the side of her yard where it wasn't an issue. And then I took them to the dump and got my money and made like $100 or something like that.
Wow.
Then took it down to the local store and got my first thruster. And it was like a double deck pad Gorilla Grip thruster with like these interesting little half dome bubbles all on the bottom for speed. I don't know.
I remember those. They were made off the golf ball idea that helps the golf ball fly, the dimple bottoms.
Exactly. Like that, when those people have the suction cup pops on their back, I always think of those that look, little pop, pop, pop. So I got that board and got me a wetsuit. I got a leash and had like a, fluoro wavelength, yellow and gold and black, which I thought was cool because of the Lakers. And first day I went out, my cousin took me out on like a 6-second interval, thumping day with no space in between the waves. And I just got destroyed. I just came in feeling so like, oh my God, I don't know if it's cut out for me. I might just stick to boogie boarding. It's so much easier, And then next day was like storm was gone. And Ollie and I were back on it, and we just did that for our I've never stopped. It's just to this moment, I still have that in me. And like the happiest place I get is when I'm like bouncing between different boards and feeling all the joys of the ocean. And yeah. And so that experience, that summer, 8 years old, that really set the course for the man I am today. And if Len hadn't come into our lives, I always wonder, I'm like, what would I have been like? I could have been some urban guy or gotten into big trouble. A lot of kids I know has gotten into such big trouble and their lives are never the same, and puts it all into perspective, because Len just passed away, and I'm so grateful, really for him. He was such a good dude. He was such a good man. He just set the bar on what good men are supposed to be like, how they raise a family, how they do their business, how they, how you handle yourself. And yeah, my mom and I, it just was all up and up from there. Her practice just took off, and she became a very renowned chiropractor and helped thousands and thousands of people over 27 years of brick and mortar. Yeah, it was just such a good transition. Such a good transition. And then on the school front, because it's obviously such a big thing now, raising children, it's like what every parent talks about. Where are we going to put our children? And what's the community like? And
we're doing that right now.
I think your family, our family, that's like the most important thing you're trying to set up is like how you rear your children in those formative years. And I can just recall one day at my new school, Mara Catalina, I was playing on a huge grass field. We didn't have a grass field at the old school. It's just all cement. And it was just a huge grass field. And I was supposed to be playing soccer, but I just was mesmerized by all the butterflies. And I was just like running after butterflies. And they kept saying, Chris. I'm like, huh? And then I would like, huh? And then I'd look up and all I'd see is the shimmering patterns of like sun and wind rippling across the Pacific all the way out to Catalina Island. And it was just panorama. And I'm just like, wow. I mean, what a difference. It was such an incredible difference. And it really was a hard learning curve to get back to where all those children were. They were light years ahead of me, but I put in the hard work and I got there and made some great friends.
What a testament to the sort of subtle benefits of privilege, being at a nicer school, getting to have nature be part of your day instead of just metal and concrete and maybe a dusty corner to play in.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
And that must have started stimulating the artist in you.
Oh yeah, they had an art program right away. There was like no art program at my old school. There's some great art that came through all the way through my high school years. We had like a renowned ceramics department. His name was Mr. Bradbury. We've spoken of him, and he helped so many children. He was such a good dude. I mean, for especially the kids that had a harder time fitting into the mainstream schooling process of California at the time through the 90s, which I definitely did. It was not my deal. I already was calling bullshit on a lot of the information I was being fed. It didn't feel right. And then I was doing my own reading and I realized a lot of it was someone else's story, maybe not the truth. So it's hard for me to like really put all my energy into it, especially when I wanted to just put my energy into like going backpacking and making tree houses and surfing and making art. And Mr. Bradbury just gave us this incredible space to make and create and listen to music and be with our peers and like have a safe spot at school. You know, California is like, even if you are of privilege, they'll pack so many children into one place just because we have so many people.
I really had that with my art experience in high school as well. It was this real sanctuary. It was a place to be, sort of drop out of being hyper cerebral at school. Like it's all thinking and rote memorization and following rules. And then you had this space that just the energy of that room, for me, it was ceramics, was just like freedom. It just felt like freedom. There were no right answers or wrong answers. It was just experimentation and play. And it's a shame seeing how undervalued arts is becoming in mainstream education. It made a huge difference in my life and yours too. And Dave didn't go to school really ever, so probably not for him. But
yeah, you'll notice that there's not much I'm adding to this part of the conversation. Just sort of staring into space, looking at some butterflies outside, Christopher.
Yeah,
that's why we're such good friends. I really love when people choose, I guess, less extravagant and more subtle stories for that response to that question, and that it doesn't have to be this world-changing, world-shaking moment in your life. It could just be a simple thing like realizing the magic of the water and the magic of the living world around you when you've had that contrast and the change. I can relate to that in a similar way where when we moved from New Zealand, I felt like I had come from the country and come from big, wide open, barefoot spaces, dirty all the time sort of stuff, and moved to the Gold Coast. And I did not feel right there, right? And I remember my first day at school, I was just telling Minnow this yesterday because we took Minnow to school yesterday, or kindy, after him not going for a long time. And he was crying and having a hard time with it. And eventually I had to leave. And I remembered that my first day in Australian school, I was bawling my eyes out as well. And I do think that it would have been many factors, but also the thing of going to an urban environment and just feeling dislocated at a moment. But then again, for me, like you, the ocean came in and the wildness of that space, and especially the savior for young boys and then about to become young men, being able to get your ass handed to you in the ocean and humbled satisfies that invincibility streak that we think we have when we're teenagers, you know, it puts you in your place and you go, oh shit, okay, I pushed it a little bit far there. That's the edge. Cool. I'll bring it back a touch or whatever. Or you just go and you get energy and emotions out in a way that you can't verbally get out. You know, I remember for me, and I'm sure it was similar for you and Ollie there, you'd be having a hard time in the world or dealing with your hormones, whatever it is, a young teenage man. And you go to the beach and rah, you shout, you scream when you see a wave that's coming at you that's got some girth or consequence. And you move your body in ways and you get pressed and pushed in ways that just make it okay again. And I wonder for you, was that part of that going to that next step where it's like you started that relationship in that part of California with the ocean, but you were still alongside a pretty wild human location on the planet. Like that's the population of Australia exists in that area alone. Yeah. So there's a lot of other stresses that would have been there.
100%.
Can you speak to that period where you then started to see and feel ways that surfing and the ocean were helping you deal with life?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's well said. And I agree with you on so many levels there. I would say, you know, especially going into high school when you start getting all that machismo and, you know, just the dynamics of, you're still a kid, but you're growing into a man's body. So you're surfing, you're out with men mostly. It's, you know, it's not a ton, especially the waves I grew up in. It's like, there's not a lot of kids taking a crack at them. So mostly men. So you are all of a sudden in the men's pecking order and you've got a body like a man, but you're still a kid. So I remember that dance of like really finding the line. Like I grew up in a place where, as Dave mentioned, there's a lot of people and a lot of influence and a lot of things going on. And it was at the time, a lot of drugs and just a lot of violence too, really. I mean, just to come down
and
to
surf
it.
culture too, right?
Oh, yeah.
In terms of localism and enforcing waves. And that was a very real threat at that point in the surfing timeline, wasn't it?
And this is predating everybody with a camera, phone in their hand. I feel like that was such a blessing that I didn't grow up with a phone in my hand. I didn't have a phone until I was 21. I like could have gone there, but I just was like, why would I want a phone? My mom could get a hold of me at any moment. That was like, seriously, my thought, like, I just want to like be free, you know, like to me, surfing and like nature was freedom. Like we were just discussing and it was the way, like Dave was saying, that I would process everything. Cause obviously like hormones and becoming a man and the balance with girls and boys and friendships and all there's no better place. I've always considered the ocean to be my like psychiatrist or however you want to look at it. My place where I go, not only worship, but process. And like Dave was saying, I think everybody probably has it, but there's something about a big wave breaking out just in front of you that occasionally you just have to let out some primal scream at it because it's like, it's way better to primally scream and put everything into the ocean versus a human. Like, I trust the ocean much more than I trust most humans. I grew up around so many humans that I learned quickly to find the ones that I can trust and really put everything into them. And they're all still lifelong friends. And then I also learned how to protect myself because when you have that many different people coming in with different agendas and different stuff, you've got to...
I can really vouch to that. That is so true of you.
You got to put up a shell. And I'm a Cancer. And so I'm all about my shell and my crew and my family. And then if you're not in that, you're just not in it. And some people could perceive it as being rude, but it's just how it makes
I really get that.
For me.
I see that in you, and I understand now more than ever that that's where that really honorable and discerning side of you comes from. I just thought, oh, it's just who you are. Your family just raised you that way and have that kind of clarity and discerning nature to go, okay, that's a personality or a type of drama that I don't want to invite into my world. And that's cool. You're staying over there. And I can get how that is totally how it would happen when you live in that location on the edge, in the very leading edge of Los Angeles 100%. And how that's continued into your life. And
I asked Maggie, your beautiful wife, what she loves most about you, what she respects and admires most about you. And we love getting to be around you both because you treat each other with such respect and sweetness and kindness and really love in action. It's a really beautiful thing that isn't the most common dynamic between couples, especially as the decades get on. Mm-hmm. It was a long conversation, I'll say. She had many things to list, but one of the themes...
Time thinking of anything, really.
No, that was not the case at all. One of the themes that came up was your steadfastness, how solid and unwavering you are, just speaking to the sort of characteristics that you were speaking to before. I really see that in you, how loyal and committed you are to the people who are in your inner circle. And it's really a quality that defines who you are to me. And Dave, I think, is a very similar personality in some ways. And I love getting to see the friendship that you both have. And I kind of wanted to steer the conversation in that direction, the closeness of a male friendship over time in the water and what that's meant to you. Maybe you can start by telling us where you met.
Well, I was at a downtown Los Angeles bar and I really had some moves those days, and Christopher just couldn't resist when he saw me stepping and jiving on the floor, cutting rug. No, it actually, I remember distinctly hanging out with Thomas Campbell doing some surf film stuff, playing around, and I remember he was just saying, "Oh, you haven't hung out with Christopher Del Moro, have you?" And I was like, No, I've heard of him, but no, we've never crossed paths." And he's like, "I really think you should." And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was then when we picked up the wood boards and threw ourselves under the bus in Hawaii. Yeah, that was pretty much it. And then
the first time.
That was like 2007, 2008. We were just talking about it. I just finished doing the Cove projects with Luis Ahoyas and the OPS crew and everything in Japan and other stuff with them. And I was also at a time where I was really hoping to reach out to other surfers, sponsored surfers who felt equally passionate and willing to do something about the things that we were encountering as traveling surfers, given that we were visiting these places year in and year out, and we would see issues that perhaps we could help with, we could lend a hand to in some way. And so I would always petition every surfer I came across who might have some sort of loudspeaker or skill that would be useful in those efforts. And I remember when we met up, it was just like sparks were flying. You had all your art skills, you had your academic history too, which I really appreciated, which was uncommon for surfers who were sponsored and traveling at that time. So it was like, wow, you have grey matter in between your ears. That's cool. That's unusual for us. And then, of course, your art skills, and then, of course, the surf skills and the waterman nature, which I was going to mention, I feel comes back to the location where you grew up is a zone where Tom Blake spent time, is even the Tommy Wegners, and so that's a lineage there that's a part of the rocks, a part of the kelp, a part of those waves, that you would have tapped into for sure. Mm-hmm. So I just distinctly remember feeling such a kindred spirit when we connected there. Oh, yeah. And so I remember even being crammed into one little hire car and we're all just spitting at stories at each other. Everyone's talking over each other because you're all so excited. You know that feeling like when you're a little kid and you just, oh, what about this? Oh, what do you think about this? Yeah, I think like that too. And just so much stoke.
Oh, yeah.
And then, though, we went in the water and, I think that was like the consecration of the relationship or whatever you want to call it, where it's like the experience of what we did paddling out on those boards. Do you remember it like that or differently?
No, pretty obviously with a different accent, but I remember it very similar. I remember at the time I was in such need of someone like Dave. I had already had a wave of, did the whole young surfer sponsored, went to the world games and and then burnt out because I just couldn't handle all the fake, false everything.
Of the competitive
just
side of
meaningless, team managers. It just all felt like I just didn't like it. And where I grew up, it was all about being humble and quiet, not talking about anything. Just getting barrels and keeping it, to yourself. And so it was a weird, it was like dual.
I don't think of that when I think of California and surfing
Yeah,
culture.
but not that specific spot.
Dual life,
Underneath
really.
it all, yeah.
Yeah. So that was always interesting to me. And in the fabric, like Dave was saying, of like the history, I just loved it. Like Tom Blake was the lifeguard at the Olympic sized pool in the landslide area that my great grandparents were members at. So it's in my story. And then I grew up watching Tom Wagner and Watermen TV on public TV, which the kids loved it, and we still do. I want to get a copy of all that if you're listening, mate. and so I loved it all. And we had Hap Jacobs and Bean Copeland, and the history of surfing was all there, and really great longboard, clubs. And that was just part of me. And so when John Wagner was like, "Oh, Chris," and he's always been so cool and hooked me up with rad boards to try since we were young. And he grew up in the same community as I, and so did Tom. And John's like, "I got these wooden boards you should try. Tom's freaking on them in Australia. You got to give him a go." And he gave me an Elia. And I instantly was just hooked on the speed and the trim and the whole deal. And I loved it. And it was such a just direct link to the origins of the beginning of surfing. And then Thomas and I started riding waves together, and Thomas and I had a cool relationship through my college years in UC Santa Cruz. And we did a lot of surfing together and a lot of talking and dreaming and art and all sorts of fun stuff. And then Thomas like randomly called me. We had surfed Swamis on a really good day. And I remember getting some beautiful waves that day with him. And then like maybe 3 days later, he called me and he was like, "Oh, I've been thinking about that session, and there's like a big swell coming to the North Shore. And I've got Dave Rostovich and Dan Malloy, and I want you to come and be the third guy. And I want you guys to really test the limits of these boards." It was obviously a yes, please, but also like, wow, these are like my heroes at the time. These are guys that I had never known, and couldn't believe I was on a plane within a couple, 12 hours, and just had no boards, just went with like my stuff and showed up, and we had this amazing quiver of Elias. And like instantly, I had known Dan already. I take that back. I had known Dan, but instantly when Dave and I met, I was just enthralled with Dave's everything about him on land, in water. It's just so stimulating, so much depth.
He's stimulating.
Yes. He is.
Oh my.
Sorry. How to do it.
When you said that, leaning in towards that phallic looking microphone, that was exciting for me.
And yeah, that trip it tested me and my water limits, I guess. And
I was going to say excitement, but the waves.
Oh, it was next level. I mean, yeah. I had luckily already had a cool relationship with Sunset. I loved Sunset Beach, and had ridden for a company that had a house on Sunset for many years. So I had like a lay of the land, but to all of a sudden be on just a piece of wood and be out there and be neutral buoyancy going under, 8 to 10 foot or whatever. It was big.
How do you duck dive a la Ia when you have massive whitewater? I mean, I know they're easy.
Because you go straight under.
Yeah.
You could,
but you also don't. I feel like you don't have the momentum of foam that you can push and then create that curve.
When you turn your board to the side, if you duck dive, you actually, you wouldn't, because you have only just come to shortboards. But if you turn your board to the side, it's much easier to scoop down. With the LA, if you turn it to the side, it's just this thin knife that you're pushing down rather than this broad, flat surface. And you just go straight under all the cleanups.
Oh, wow.
And what I've discovered in that circuit
was that true for
incredible.
You, Chris?
Yeah, it was.
Other people on foam boards would get rinsed and get washed back, and you wouldn't. So the third or fourth wave of the set, you'd be under the peak, and there wouldn't be anyone else there, because they would either paddled way out to avoid getting cleaned up on their tankers and too far out, or they were washed in, and you were in this little happy zone in the middle, and it was surprisingly easy to get waves among a modern crowd out there. Yeah, so that was kind of cool.
But you also stay under much longer than anyone with foam because you're neutral buoyancy.
Yeah.
And I think most of us were just in shorts and a wetsuit top. That's what I remember rocking. Yeah. So you would literally just be trying to relax and hold your breath, and then you just slowly work your way back up to the surface on like a piece of foam where it like rockets you back up, you know? And Oh boy, the body took such a beating on that trip. I swear I almost broke my back. I scorpioned off of a chip shot at West Peak Sunset and went full speed on my belly. And I had so much offshore in my eyes that I didn't know where I was. And when I came to, I was going off of the bowl at like probably 20, 30 miles an hour because those things are like a piece of bar soap in the tub, and just went. I've never flown that long, that far. The way I landed, my back of my feet hit my back of my head. And it was like so crazy. Like literally, I went totally numb on my lower body, couldn't feel anything. I thought I was paralyzed. I was just laying, getting pounded by waves, lost my board. There's obviously no leashes or anything. And I was thinking, I just remember laying on my back, like praying and going, no, this can't be it. I have got way too much more to do. I can't like lose the sensation in my lower body. Please, please, please. And then a couple more took me down, and I was just maintaining with my arms, and then felt my toes come back and everything, all the blood came back, and then slowly came back, and I went to shore and licked my wounds, lost my board, and Dave Wassel, I think that's how you pronounce his name, legendary lifeguard, North Shore, big wave guy. He saved my board on a jet ski because it was in the reverse current going out. And he's like, I normally wouldn't do this for anyone who loses their board, but I'm impressed that you guys are giving it a crack on those boards. So here's your board, kid. I was like, thank you. Thank you. Because did not want to lose one of our prize boards.
Yeah.
Speaking of lifeguarding, I'd love to dive into that part of who you are, Chris. Over the last decade or so, Dave and I both have been continually astounded by the way your first responder skills are needed and required, and how you are there in these situations that seem unimaginable, unthinkable, really critical, dire moments. And you rise to these occasions with such presence and calm because you have the skills to respond.
You know, I'll come back to the legacy of like South Bay and Palos Verde of just, there's some of the most incredible watermen, really, considering, you know, where we were. We had thumping beach breaks, so many people, big waves. It's just like really created a lot of underground next level watermen there. And those are the people I worshiped as a child. You know, they're just these guys that are just humble warriors.
Do you want to name them?
I mean, like Joe Bark, obviously, he's like he's one of the Lord's kids that we mentored. Alex Gray turned into be some of the best tube riders in the world. And I mean, there's so Tommy Kirk, like there's so many legendary elders that I grew up with, the Wagners, like there's a lot of them. And most of them are not looking for accolade. They're just doing it because they love the ocean, and that's what they do. And so that lineage, it's like a rite of passage where I grew up to be an LA County lifeguard. And as funny as it was, you know, growing up, I watched Baywatch and all that. And, you know, that was also part of the whole deal. But then when you're 18, you can get on when you're 18. And I wanted to push myself. It was like what every waterman where I grew up wants to do, is to make it as a lifeguard. And at the time, I was doing junior college online at my auntie's house in Solana Beach. And it was like I moved out of the house just to like at 17 or 18, just to start my own process. And I applied for a master's swim program. So I just started swimming laps because I had heard that's really the only way you're going to compete.
What does that mean?
Master's
swim?
It's basically a program for all different strokes, and it's a master class. And so people get together and you swim like an hour and a half or an hour or whatever. And you've got these certain patterns that you do, and you swim your ass, and everyone's like gnarly swimmers with really good technique, and they will critique you and straighten you out and just get you into the rhythm of not fighting water. And I'd done obviously that, but then I went so on the neck up surfing program for so long that it was good to like have these gurus of swimming and water dynamics like straighten me back out. And so I really focused on that, and I loved it. I actually really enjoyed it. It was so different than what I'd done. And so I did the master swim program. And then for a guy like me, it was like, basically what they do is it's an open swim for the LA County lifeguards at the time. And it was at Santa Monica Pier. And I got so lucky because there's one testing day and that's it. And I think it was 380 people or something like that with one right-hand turn and one more right-hand turn. It's a mile swim. And you got to run out, hit that right-hand turn, swim your mile, run, hit the next one, and come to the first 99 that make it to the line, get taken to, you go through LA County Fire Department. You get to interview if you get the 99. Then they weed you down from there because you're going through the fire program and they take that really serious. Wow. And so I just remember being so nervous. And at the time I had really long hair, like almost to my butt, just like long blonde locks. And so I put that all up in a bun and I got into my budgie smuggler and like, I'm there like with all these like UCLA water polo studs that are doing all these like muscle slapping and just full pure muscle. And I'm just this like lanky little 18-year-old. I'm like, oh my Lord, what am I doing here? I'm never going to make this. I just remember thinking I've just wasted like a whole year swimming for no reason. But it was like 4 foot of south swell, maybe. It was pretty solid. And so they're like, all right, racers, on your marks. Boom, gun goes off. Everyone runs straight out. And I'm just like, oh my God, there's only about 30 of us that just go hard left and just run way down beach, down south, then jump in and then come with the current to hit that buoy. And by the time I hit that, buoy, I still have never experienced anything more aggressive. I don't think there was people that were like punching, grabbing, kicking, ripping your pants off. I got grabbed by somebody. Yeah. Like water polo players, you know? Because I grew up playing water polo too. I mean, that's what they do.
You're vying for a job, I guess.
Yeah, but at the time, you're making almost $30 an hour. That was like good money with benefits. LA County, you know, like it's. Okay. So these guys were grabbing. Somebody grabbed me from my shoulders, pulled me backwards, stepped on my back, and then gave me like a double-footed send down. And I went like deep. And I remember just having to like take a moment, and I opened my eyes and I looked, and all I saw was a sea of people doing the same thing, scratching and punching and trying to get around this corner. And I was like, oh my God. And so I made the decision at that point, I'm just going to swim underwater and evade all these psychopaths. And so I just swam under because luckily it went right before the guy plunged me, and I swam. I made it just for the records. I made it around the buoy. I didn't, you know,
you didn't shortcut.
I didn't shortcut. I went around the buoy, but I went around the rope. And then I came up about 6 feet later, and then it's the long swim. And then at that point, it's just you against these beasts that are just like the gnarliest swimmers you've ever seen. And I swam my ass off, and I got all the way to the next corner. And then everybody's just still swimming head down. And I'm thinking, only way I'm going to make this, I'm looking at the people already lining up. I'm like, oh my God, that looks close to 100. I'm like, only way I'm making this is if a set comes. So I just stopped. Just started doing like deep pranayama breathing. I was already into yoga. And so I was just really trying to fill myself up, and a set came, and I freaking caught that set, and I body surfed past about 100 people. I swear to God. And they were just getting pegged in their head. Like, you know, like just unbelievable. And I just went right to the sand, jumped up, bam, made it. I was like 92.
Oh, wow.
Something.
Wow.
Once I made it to interview, I got like an old school lifeguard captain who was a surfer, and instantly they were like, go home and cut your hair, you're on, kid, and got the job. And then from there on out, I learned all the skills that you need to like deal with not only saving people's lives on all sorts of levels, but also dealing with really radical stuff, you know, because my first year I worked under Dockweiler, which is directly under LA Airport, and I was dealing with so much more than saving people's lives. You know,
what kind of radical stuff?
Oh God, where to begin? Yeah, one day I spotted in the binos this kid trying to rape a girl in the rocks, like a big jetty. He didn't think anyone was looking, and the whole thing about lifeguarding is you just never take your eyes off of your water. And it was just on the opposite side of where the next lifeguard could see, but he was only about 20, 30 feet away. You know, it was just down a slope. And so I called him, I called the captain, called everybody, because I'm like, this is serious. Yeah. They went down, the kid starts running, runs up next thing you know, these guys are all chasing him. He runs back to his party. It happens to be a huge group of gangbangers. And then all those gangbangers, I keep the water. I keep my tower because I'm not just about to leave. Those guys go chasing. Captain goes chasing. Bam, they get back. And then it's like a group of like 20 or 30 gangbangers against 2 lifeguards. And they just kicked my fellow lifeguards' ass, like gnarly, like full ambulance, like helicopters by the end of the day. I had no idea any of it went on. I couldn't see over the sand behind me. All of a sudden I see news copters and I'm like, so it was just so much more. But also I learned so many good things. Like you go up to a group of like 40 or 50 really intimidating dudes and they're all drinking and they're all doing everything you're not supposed to do. I learned how to come into that crowd and not be a threat, but be more of like have the brother connection. Like, I just want to let you all know, if the police come, which they come every 45 minutes on quads, this whole group you're all going to be like either, arrested or and so it was a really good people skill to not fear, and so often it would just end up lovely. They'd be like, oh man, appreciate that. Like keep it all, put it down. And I'm like, that's a good idea. And then they'd give me plates of food and thank you. I'm like, all right, cool, thanks. And it was just I just learned so much off of lifeguarding and I've used those skills like my entire life. And I honestly, like when I think back onto that, the rookie school was so radical. Like there's 2 classes, there was like 40 of us in each class. And when I think of like all the things I did surfing as far as like competitive stuff, none of it makes me proud. I know all of it. I remember throwing all my trophies away. Wish I would have kept one. I threw every single trophy away when I was like 17, because I was just like, this is just, I'm about the art of surfing, not the competitive. But something about the lifeguard rookie school when I ended up winning Rookie of the Year. And that's like one of the proudest things I've probably ever pulled off, because it was against like some of the most incredible watermen I've ever been with in a group like that, and tested to the point of like, the entire group thrown up, and it just tested beyond.
Yeah, physical limits.
And to have my peers pick me, and my grandfather at the time was alive, my grandmother, my mom, and my whole family. And I was like, when they said my name, it honestly went right past me. I'm like, Chris, there was another Chris in this class? And everyone's looking at me. I'm like, that cannot be me. I just remember
so awesome.
No way. And I had to go up there and like give a speech with the fire captain. And it was just like surreal. That's the thing I'm most proud of as far as like winning something in my life would be that, or achieving something. I didn't win. I put everything I had into it. It was amazing.
Chris, can you tell us about a time when having an understanding of really basic life-saving skills made a difference in someone's life? I'm thinking specifically of the Bali story.
Yeah.
If you're up for sharing that.
Yeah, I'll share that because it was a powerful experience. Yeah, so I had just gotten to Bali. This was many years ago. This is pre-children, probably 12 years ago, 10 years ago or something. And waves were pumping at on the Phuket in Uluwatu. I remember my dear friend Tim Russo. We surfed for like 4 hours that day until we were just like so burned out and tired. And it was really, really a special day. Then I was exhausted and I had just flown from Japan, and I was with my wife, and the girls were doing something, and I was like, I need to take a nap. I just got to go to sleep. And so I just passed out and went to bed, and I was deep in sleep. And then all of a sudden, Tim, who's like, I call him Big Chill, he's the most chill dude ever, is knocking frantically on the door, and basically just like burst in. He's like, you got to wake up. You have to wake up. And he owns the Uluwatu Surf Villas. And so he's got an accommodation with just all these different people from all over the world that are staying there constantly. And he says, there's a little boy who drowned, and you're the only one I can think of who knows CPR. And we got to go now. And I don't even know if I had a shirt on. I think I was just in boardies. And I just got up and we just started running, and we're running uphill. And the whole time I'm just like, surging adrenaline and just blood and just everything. Because I've already been on enough resuscitations and life-threatening situations where I just know you got to get so clear and so centered before you go into it. And so I get there, and they had a yoga shala there, and yoga had just finished. So there's all these yogis with their mats, and then there's a circle of people, and then there's a mother, and she's on top of her son. And her energy was just like a wild animal. That's what it felt like, just protecting the space, protecting her child. And I came in and it was like some people were happy to have me there. Other people I could tell were like, don't touch. And I just didn't listen to anybody. I was just, at that point, I've already been hit by people in the face trying to save their child's life. And I know what happens. You get into a radical state. So I was already ready to get hit or attacked or whatever, but I didn't care because I saw how bad the situation was. And the child just had this giant extended belly, and he was just purple, and he was pretty much dead. And I went straight in. I just said, somebody, you got to get the mom away. I have to have space. And they did that, got the boy. Instead of going to compressions, I went straight to back blows, which I just felt like would be quicker. And just because of the amount of water in his stomach, just wanted to see if I could get whatever it was out of his throat and his belly out as soon as possible. So I flipped him over. And for those of you who don't know, you just take an infant. He wasn't an infant. He was 3. He's a pretty solid kid. And I flipped them, and you put their mouth and their nose between your fingers, and then you put their torso up your forearm with their legs splitting around your bicep, and you reverse gravity, so head down. And then I just started giving them big flat-handed back paddles right into the back of your shoulder blades. First blow, he just absolutely released like a gallon or more of water and orange and hot dog and all sorts of stuff. Second one, again, I was able to get so much water out of him, which was basically he was like blocked up. He was completely saturated with water, and got all that out. And then there was just a bit of life that came back into him, and he was just gasping for breath and taking a little bit of oxygen in. But at that point, I didn't know how much water was in his lungs, and that's obviously not good, and how long his brain had not had oxygen. And then we went on a radical wild goose chase in a car through like roads that weren't roads in a tiny little car. We got to a hospital. They didn't know what they're doing. So I had to make the executive call to get him out of that hospital and take him away from the doctors. And then we went to a Western hospital a little further down. And at that point, he was in good care. And it was just absolute miracle. He had minor water in his lungs, fully got him back to life. And like 2 days later, the family had me up to celebrate, and he was swimming in the pool. His name was Felix. And yeah, he's such a special boy. I've never seen him since, but I hold such a strong love for him. It was such a powerful space for me, and I'm so happy I was there. I just can't imagine having not been there. Obviously, it was like meant to be, and everybody at the villas became CPR certified, and everything really took a good step from there. And just the love and his family gave to me, and just seeing him swimming and smiling and happy, it was just, it was like that was I would say my most loved rescues of all time, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a crazy turnaround.
We were just camping together for a week, and this story came up, and it was just such a fantastic reminder to get requalified in CPR and the difference it can make, having these really basic survival skills.
I would say to anyone out there listening, you can just, even if you can't go do the proper course, just study up enough to where you've got your basics in case you're ever out somewhere where there's not other people who know how to do Heimlich or, compressions or whatever it is. And one thing I will say is that in that group, there was about 20 plus people, and nobody was doing anything. And it's always better to try than not do anything and watch, because the longer you're without oxygen, the worse it is on the patient. So yeah, maybe just skip doing a show one night, or skip doing a hour of phone time, cut that down and just hone up on your skills, because they're life-saving. And especially if it's your family or your child or your auntie or uncle or something, and you were the one who is able to help, like the most valuable time you've ever spent.
Please stay tuned while we take a quick break to acknowledge the folks who help make our podcast possible.
If the first 50 years were an experiment
to prove that a business could be
responsible
and successful,
turns out it's not just possible,
it's profitable.
So what's next?
What's next is simple. It's human-powered And it's finding the joy in doing difficult things.
What's next is turning capitalism on its head.
And putting all our money where our mouth is.
What's next is unstoppable.
Thanks to Patagonia for their continued support this season and for prioritizing purpose over profit to protect our wondrous planet, our only home. Born on the back streets of Byron Bay, Stone and Wood is a certified B Corp started by 3 mates who wanted to make a beer business with a difference, a brewery for the community. Through their ingrained foundation, Stone and Wood donates money and volunteer hours directly to the communities where they work and live, focusing on the environment and social causes at a grassroots level. Thanks for your support this season, Stone and Wood, and thanks for giving back to our community here on the Northern Rivers. Learn more at stoneandwood.com.au.
Speaking of meaningful things, art and how meaningful your art is for you, Chris, has always been obvious to those of us around you. And it was not long after we met up in Hawaii with Thomas and became quickly very good mates that there was an opportunity to do a, surf and community conservation trip that I was boiling up at that point, which was a trip to Chile. So every year at that stage in my life, I would go with Howie Cook, one of our other best mates, an amazing artist, to the International Whaling Commission, IWC, which is always in a new location every year. They'd always make it somewhere difficult to get to because they didn't want rat bags like us getting there. And so we would somehow get there anyway and cover the events, cover the news, kind of like a surf journalist sort of group, though we would also meet up with scientists and other activists who are there to learn about the whale's modern predicament when it comes to interacting with fishing fleets and in particular poachers and whaling vessels around the world. And so this particular trip was to Chile, where there was the proposition of protecting all of Chilean waters from the very top to the very bottom, all the way out 200 odd miles out to sea, which is more ocean territory than they have land territory in Chile. We had Ramon Navarro, local Chilean surf legend, with us. And we basically wanted to have a traveling caravan of surfers and artists and activists and musicians and locals and scientists and writers move from the very top of Chile to the bottom along the coast, alerting everyone to the fact that there's the potential to protect the whales that migrate that coast from other nations that were coming there to poach, basically. At that stage, we came up with the idea of yourself and Howie being the in-residence artists for the trip. And that was where I got to see your art skills really shine alongside Howie. And he's always had that where there's a wall, there's a whale idea.
Yep.
And Howie is a much loved member of our friend group. And that was where I feel like we really got to see you, just the depth of your character really shine through your art. Can you speak to us what that meant to you at that stage and any of that?
Yeah, we touched on it earlier when we started talking about meeting, but like I was saying, Dave brought so much to my life at that time. My kind of jaded look at the industry, because I was in it, Dave was over here, and I feel like it's a lot easier to not be in the industry over here.
In Australia.
In Australia, yeah. And I was in Southern Cal. So when we met, he just had so much. I was so enthralled by his work, the conservation work for the dolphins and the whales and everything he'd done in Taiji at the time and all these things. And they were like big endeavors that were all succeeding. And it was so impressive. I had never met another surfer at the time, a traveling surfer that cared much more than just getting clips, getting in the mags, getting their paycheck, having fun. That was about, that was like the depth of it.
Yeah.
Not to say that was a bad thing or anything, but nobody was doing like conservation work.
It was a very, very self-centered life.
100%. At that time, it was like, in the early 2000s and, that era. So meeting Dave, and then we had Oahu, which was successful, and the present ended up being a really blessing. I was so honored to be in that film. And then to have I felt like it was within a month, Dave's like, hey, would you like to come on this trip that I'm organizing, at the time via Billabong and Surfers for Cetaceans? And here's the concept. And it was like a month in Chile painting. And yes, I will be there wherever you need. So I came in and instantly just met some of my best mates to this date, which is Hilton Daw, who at the time was the staff photographer, and then Howie Cook, who's been a full mentor as far as painting, murals, living the artist life. He is the quintessential artist. I mean, the guy just lives and breathes art.
We'll have him on the podcast soon when we can pin him down.
Oh, yeah, Howie, come on, mate. Come and sit in this seat, brother. I can't wait to hear your stories. But Howie was so welcoming, non-competitive, and was such a good educator. And like, we're much different in our art. I'm like a meticulous perfectionist that will just, one line will keep me working on it for hours, where Howie's like, we don't have that time. We got a couple hours, we got a couple paint, and the police might be coming. So let's get this done, Come on, Laura, let's go. And it was good for me to like get me out of my standard quo and do something different. And man, we painted a lot on that trip, like big scale, like large whales, many of them. And it was so amazing for me to put my activism that I had already started through my UC Santa Cruz education and be able to bring that into my surfing career. And so it like added this level of depth of character that I already had. That's just who I was. I always loved nature. I always, since the beginning, have been looking at the whole spectrum of how the earth feels, what humans do, and how our impact changes and creates major issues, basically. And being able to like put my art and my voice and help on a campaign like that, and it just kind of snowballed from there. I felt like next thing you know, it was like 10 years, and it really made my surfing career and my art career just go to the next level. Like if I hadn't have done that, I think I would have just burned out within a couple of years and just gone into a whole different spectrum. But it was like,
because of having a deeper purpose.
For sure. Having a deeper purpose and like being part of Surfers for Cetaceans and having this whole crew, and we all worked together. Everyone had their skills. We had our filmers, we had the people who were great at speeches. Like Dave was so good at large groups and bringing them all together and visualizing these huge concepts and bringing a million pieces into one, and then making it fun with music and art. And, then we started having the, Band of Frequencies, and always music, art, surf, and environmentalism. That felt like the key components to our life for like a decade. I'm very grateful. Felt like so lucky. It could have been a million people, and somehow I ended up in that position to be part of this like super team of Aussies that were like so fun and lighthearted and different than what I had grown up with, And it was just it's just epic. It was just such a great time when I look back on it. Painting, and in Chile everybody was just like, oh yeah, paint on front of my house. Paint this wall, paint this car. I mean, it was like everybody wanted you to paint stuff.
What was the concept behind the whale murals?
Well, Howie he would always have we would always do a large whale, and we'd always try to incorporate children too, with like schools or school groups or whatever. And just having people like bring the ocean into their land-based cement life and be thinking about that. And then we would have Dave and Howie like give a great informative talk about what was coming in, the legislation and what all these bigger projects were, just to get people's like minds in the water, and I think the art was a fun way to get them involved too. And also beautify, like most of Latin America has very poppy, bold colors. And then you throw a big old giant humpback or southern right whale or blue, whatever. And it's just they're just beautiful and large scale. And Howie's such a master that I learned so much. From him. It was so great.
I have to say there's so many magic moments that happened throughout all the years of murals. And one of them that comes to mind that I'll quickly remind you of was when we were in the really remote parts of northern Chile, and we'd been driving for many, many hours in the dark, and Ramon wasn't with us, and we ended up finding, but he told us where to go to find a particular wave that we could go surf the next day, in between doing lots of other stuff. And then when we finally made it to this location. We're in the middle of nowhere. There was 2 surfers out in the lineup, and it was like the broadest, emptiest coastline. And right as we got there, they're waving, we're waving, and then Howie started to just paint a little whale on one of the rocks. And right at that moment, behind those 2 surfers jumped a couple of whales.
Oh, yeah.
They breached behind the surfers, and then those surfers came in and were like, wow, like the epic Chilean hospitality and just vibe.
Yeah.
And we all busted out the vino tinto and got a fire going and stuff. But it was this moment where they saw that this big, wild, traveling caravan of people rocked up. And right as we rocked up with the whales on our mind and the people of Chile on our mind and that place, and then how we did that little subtle little painting on a rock that those whales breached right at that moment was one of those little moments that seemed to happen pretty much every day and then happened on every one of our trips, where we would have that magic. We'd have an encounter with blue whales straight off of LA where you grew up, where they're underneath our crafts, the biggest animals ever to have lived.
Full eye contact with the blue whale.
You know,
that's
like just so much magic. And I feel like the art was a part of that, of course. And, you know, don't we all feel magic when art touches or moves us in some way?
Yeah. Oh, I think you and I and Lauren and our crew, it's an artful life in all forms: word, surf, painting, music. It's just, it makes life. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Make it beautiful.
Beautiful.
Oh, I love hearing you guys recount those trips. I'm sad I missed out on those early days.
Oh, but you were there quickly. We had just not that long without you, and then you were part of the whole traveling gypsy team.
But I love how this kind of weaving our play lives into our deep care for the living world, into our working lives, was part of answering a question maybe we had consciously or not, and that is, how do we make activism generative for ourselves personally? How do we make it fun? How do we keep it alive and not like this doomsday overwhelm situation that so many of us get bogged down in? And you all did that so well. You could see it from the outside and you could feel it from the inside. It really was about celebrating the beauty of a surfing life and being alive on this incredible living planet. And yes, there's some horrific things happening from the hands of humanity. How do we acknowledge that and put that anger, frustration into action in a way that's also generative and communal? How do we create connection and move forward with a unified voice?
Yeah, I always thought of it as though you just have to make the party that we're having better than the party that all the corpos are having.
We sure as hell did that.
You know, and also it's a tricky game because you've got the escapism of surfing and surf culture is that we're already having a fucking great time anyway.
Yeah. 100%.
So then how do you bring in, that was always the challenge and still is, how do we bring in speaking about things that aren't that much of a party to a culture that is obsessed with partying, which is pretty much what surfing is. We're here to have a good time.
Yep.
And that's either clean through surfing and whatever, or it can be a little dirty and roughed up in your nightlife with, you know, different drugs and whatever parties you go to. But it was always a challenge that we were all fully aware of. It was like, how are we going to get surfers to turn up and give a shit? How are we going to do it? How are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And that was the more central question, which was when we came together at that point, I was probably, 5 or 6 years in of just doing one sort of, at the time we called them campaigns, which I cringe about because it's a military term and I don't want to think that way anymore. But at the time it was just one campaign after another and I was cooked. I was so tired. I'm like, we need to make this fun. I'm spent and everyone else feels pretty spent. Like, how are we going to keep doing this? I have to make it fun.
I reckon you made it really fun with the vision of transparency.
Exactly. And that's when that started.
That was like, you just nailed it on. When you came up with that idea, we had guests come. We had, our fleet of ships that were going, then we had guests involved. And then we were talking to schools and we were talking to fishermen and boaters and we were in it. and we were, side by side with Sea Shepherd, and it just ended up being, it made it fun. But at the same time, we were like, ended up on, national news and like all this amazing things that happened with some direct action, some non-direct, but it was just such a great campaign. The Australian trip, like that one, it was such a game changer for me personally.
I have people reach out to me and say, I have this idea, I have this curiosity, I want to do something. How do I make a difference? I'm passionate about this or that. And I always just respond with, yes, follow your curiosity.
Do it.
Make it happen. Just try and make it fun. Shape your project, shape your passion, shape your work life in a way, jobs always feel like jobs.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But also they can be giving of energy and life and enthusiasm.
For sure.
And you all have done that so well.
But there was a goal and there was a vision. It wasn't just, we weren't just having fun. Like everyone had like, this is what you're doing, this is what, and Dave was like the captain of the ship. And I felt like everybody working together, we were able to reach a lot of people. And I was like, yeah, it was such a special month. And then obviously went to California, and then it was a whole different spectrum of reaching a whole new, and getting people and surfers out of their comfort zone and thinking about ship strikes and all these things that are happening every day. We've got like this incredible collection of blue whales that are like having to dart between just an absurd amount of tankers coming in right
and
now.
that trip did result in part of the movement to reduce the shipping speed. Yeah.
And different lanes and different spots through Santa Barbara and LA Harbor.
So that was a huge success.
Well, it trips me out now because from my grandmother's house, I can see where we were with the blue whales that afternoon. And from the whole COVID deal, occasionally you used to get like 1 or 2 tankers that would sit outside of LA Harbor because they didn't have a spot to come into. There's like 100 now.
Wow.
As far as your eye can see, all the way down to Newport, they're dropping anchor and there's 100 ships that are still backlogged. I don't know about now.
Trying to keep up with online shopping.
All of it. And to me, it's like, there's not an easier way to put into perspective than to go down to your local harbor and go up onto a platform and look at it and see that thing moving and realize everything you purchase and all your consumer habits are all coming through there. And
Got goosebumps. That's a reality. It's such a reality check.
It's a reality check.
We just saw it with the kids. We were on a ferry crossing into a harbor, and the kids were like, wow, what are those huge ships with all the little different colored blocks on them? And I was like, oh, all the stuff that we buy.
Yep.
All the jackets and the phones and anything that you buy at a shop, unless it's locally made, food included. It probably came on one of those ships in one of those containers from across the world.
Yep.
I mean, it's obvious, but it when you see it is pretty astounding.
It is pretty astounding. Then humble yourself even more and go down to your local dump and go in there and take it on, face it, look at it, get close to it and smell it and like see the level of what your town is producing. Most people have never done that. To me, that's like they're throwing away that. Like, why would you, so many things in there that do not need to be thrown away.
Yeah, Dave's the king of the local tip shop.
I don't need to twist my rubber arm when it comes to visiting the tip shop.
Oh, yeah. You guys are lucky you have them. They don't allow us to do that.
This is, I want to zoom out a little bit and also acknowledge the benefits of having global friendships and that, because we're often talking about localization, right, as this thing that fixes so many problems in the world. And sometimes people think, oh, that's like you're going to go backwards and, oh, you're not going to get to travel or you're not going to have your global experience like of being a full earthling. But at this point in time, I see that we have the opportunity, and it's ironic that it's me saying it, but through tech, we can keep relationships with friends overseas going. Or if you have the good fortune to travel and strike up a friendship with someone overseas, there are so many amazing treasures that can be experienced and gained from these friendships. And that's what I think of with you, Morat, and that Morat is Chris's Australian nickname here, in that over the years, our small space that we inhabit here is quite a bubble, northern New South Wales, east coast of Australia, easternmost point. But when we speak to you and we hear what you're talking about with LA Harbor, or we hear what you say about Southern California, and then you invited us and we did one of our transparency slow trips down the coast, stopping in at all these towns, learning about the issues that are on that coast and how surfers can participate in fixing some of those issues. That gave us a perspective, basically a bigger perspective, where we could place ourselves and our position here in Australia and go, oh, wow, okay, we don't have the scale of humanity that you all have in California, but we have the same interests and tendencies. What will Australia look like in 10 years if we continue on with those same tendencies? Well, just ask your Californian friends who have experienced that probably 10 years ago, and they can tell us, you, Chris, can tell us what to look out for. What are the pitfalls? What are the potholes? What are the things to really be mindful of and go, you might want to check yourself there, people in New Zealand or Australia or where else. And I think that's something we've always really loved, is being able to have that and have that discussion and go, oh, how did that work for you? What did you do that fixed that problem that's just starting to surface here in Australia or whatever? And I think that's something that we've always really loved, that banter.
100%. We've got the common link between New Zealand and my family there. And when I saw Costco, the first Costco open in New Zealand this year, I was just like, oh man, can't believe that big box program is taking, a hold of that culture. And it's just such a slippery slope versus just buying things that are made well and last a long time instead of, but that's a great link you're making there. And obviously I think everybody in the world would want to be raised in this part of the coast. It's just a magical place. It's kept me coming back for 20 years. Love it. And I love California, and I love so many parts of the world. Mother Nature has always been, my family, Mother Nature, surf and art. Those are like my steadfast. And coming back to what you were talking about with art, it's similar. The feeling I have with creating and making is so similar to my surfing. It's always been a way for me to unplug from all the human, the human energy. It's like my secret world that I can process and make beautiful things. And, now I kind of took a pretty big hiatus from creating, but just raising my boys was more important to me, and being there for my wife and for Maggie, and, stop doing any kind of surf thing the second I found out Marley was coming.
I want to ask you specifically about that, Chris. You were a paid traveling free surfer, professional artist, pretty good gig. Not many people turn down surf contracts, but you did. Why?
It was just so clear the second Maggie and I found out that we were going to have our first son, Marley Jedi. He was coming, and I did not want to be the father who was not present, not interested in that, and never have been and never will. And so I decided to make the change sooner than later, and just simultaneously, most of my contracts were all coming up at the same time. And I was so grateful for everyone that if you're listening and you help support me through my surfing, I'm so grateful. It feels like a dream now that I got to do that for work and pleasure, obviously. So thank you. From 12 years old on, there's so many people to thank. Hap Jacobs and Bing Surfboards and Honolulu, Billabong, Etnies. List goes on, but I'm very grateful. And I just put everything into art. I got so lucky. My wife, we have she had a successful jewelry brand called Bagsu that she's been doing for 15 years, and that's the love of her life. And
besides you,
that's her. I always say it's her first love. That was pre me and pre the boys, and so I just put everything into our family, into Maggie, and we just did markets and traveled all around America and Australia and beyond, and put it all into creating jewelry that's blessed us in so many incredible ways. And then, been fully present for my boys, just been 100% dad, and for like the last 7 years. And this year we're taking a year and just traveling, and got a great opportunity to actually take a job. And so I'm doing creative director for Drifter Surf in Bali. And that's been so far so good. I love it. I'm getting to work with my good friend Tim again, and a really great team. And yeah, just, it's great to be making art again. It's like all my little synapses are just, I'm having all these downloads, and Bali's so good for that. And now that it's like the fire's lit, I foresee so many beautiful creations coming. And if I can make people happy with my designs, that's like my ultimate goal, and do some benefit, some benefit the planet, benefit people, then best work I could do.
You're one of the most hands-on dads that I know. You and Maggie are such beautiful, egalitarian parents, and I really respect and admire that about you. What surprised you most about parenting?
What surprised me most about parenting? There's just no handbook. I guess for me, there's like, I don't know how to explain it, but it was so spiritual and so deep, and it made so many things come full circle for me, and it helped me leave a lot of things behind, and also bring a lot of things with me, mostly joyous. It's just been so rich and beautiful. And I just cannot imagine not having those two little men in my life and my wife. And I just appreciate it so much. You always think it's obviously it's hard work and compromise, and it takes a village, as you've heard many times. But most importantly, it just takes, like what you were saying, steadfast energy. If you have that and that's your main focus and you're not trying to do too much, it's one of the most beautiful, full spectrum places to put your energy you could ever ask for. And yeah, it's been very healing, really healing to be a father and change some old narratives.
We had two very distinctly different father figures in your life.
Yeah, sure did. Yeah.
Do you feel like their behavior has largely shaped your choices in your own fathering?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Lenny brought, like you were saying, steadfast energy. He woke up like 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock for almost my entire life to beat traffic, and then he'd work until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, So he'd put in these huge days. And he did that most of his entire life. And he just was always just so consistent. Just consistency, right?
That's interesting that he was there in terms of provider role, but he wasn't necessarily present in terms of the day-to-day emotional support. But you have chosen to be around for your boys in that way.
Yeah,
what shaped that?
I've always been so lucky with mentors and really good friends. Like I built my own family. That's how I always look at it. And I'm like, you don't get to pick your family, you can build it. And so he was just, he's always present. He was always there for you. If you ever needed it, he would do anything for you. But he was a hard worker, and that was just that old school head down, get it done, and provided for our family in such an incredible way. I think every generation, like when I look at like my grandfather, he went through the war, and his father, and that was all in Italy. And that was just, he was just hard. He was just very hard man. Had love for me, but also I could just see the way he treated my grandmother. It was just tough. And then my Italian dad, he's a tough dude too, obviously has love within him, but every generation is evolving. Right. And so I just saw the evolution I wanted to get to with my children. And so I made that absolute priority, and I hope that they take what they've learned from me and go to the next level, because that's the only way as a society and humanity we're going to get better. Hopefully not going backward, because I feel like everyone's got to get exponentially better with the amount of humans we have on the planet now. And if we don't, it's going to be tough. And it's like all three of us here have been so blessed by this planet. And I want my boys to have that until they're 40, 60, 80, whatever it is. And it's going to take work. You can't just be head in the clouds the whole time.
Chris, I couldn't sit down with you for a conversation without mentioning a particular photo shoot.
Oh, that's stupid. I have a question. I'm going to throw Lauren under the bus.
I'm getting there. Let me ask my question.
I'm just trying to help out my buddy
I
here.
know. No, it's going in a good
bus.
direction.
Okay.
It's a little silly, but it's fine.
All right. Where are you going with this?
You have experienced success, societal success by anyone's standards. You've been in high-end fragrance ads as a model, been paid to be a professional athlete, have traveled the world with people you love to do meaningful work. I'm curious to know how you reflect back on those times now, and specifically how your ideas of success have changed.
Oh, yeah. I've been the whole spectrum, you know, like I said, I was like hustling as an 8-year-old, digging through trash cans and to get my first board. And then I was a dishwasher in high school and worked for a French Jamaican or a Rastafarian chef. And I've done hard work. I labored. I went to college. Like I know what hard work is, and I know how hard it can be to make a living. And so when an opportunity like presents itself, I'm not going to compromise my morals. Like I've said no to one of the most famous photographers of all time, just because it was for a campaign of a company that I would never stand behind. And a lot of people will question me on that. Like, why would you ever say no to her? And it was easy. It was like, I don't stand for fur. I'm not about to like be involved with that. But something like a campaign in Paris that paid me handsomely for doing nothing when I know
sitting on a motorcycle with a topless, very, very top model at the time.
Yeah. That was like, I literally worked for 2 hours, and it was
as if you'd even need to get paid to do that.
I know.
At
the time, I'm like, are you kidding me? And then I was just, I remember thinking that night when I got that job and I got flown to Paris and da. And she was having a tantrum because, you know, her latte wasn't warm enough or whatever. And I was like, oh, sweetie, like, think about, I remember pulled her aside and I said, think about all the people that are like digging in the earth right now for work and like compromising their health, and like how lucky we are. And it just snapped her out. And I was like, if you and I can have fun and get this done and just like be lighthearted, it's going to be so much better. And she just like instantly clicked, and we just got it done in an hour. Versus the way she was coming into it, it was going to take us all day and it was going to be a nightmare. And it's like, I think you got to remember that at all time, like have perspective of what some people are going through in this life. And I never forget how lucky I am. Not to say things haven't, you know, been very tough at times, but everyone goes through that, and you just got to keep your head about it. And so, yeah, just having that big perspective, like the whole spectrum. And I feel so lucky. I have an incredible wife, an incredible family. You know, we've been able to invest wisely. Things are like in a comfortable place, and it all took hard work, and it didn't happen because we were just playing. And I just feel very grateful for all of it at this point in my life, that my children are already benefiting from all that. It's such a blessing.
There's a film made about your life story called Bella Vita, A Beautiful Life. What constitutes a beautiful life for you right now?
Oh, I'm living it daily. Really open space for me with your family, open space with your family. Pretty simple. That I'm honestly like pure Mother Nature and your family and your friends. And I don't want to overcomplicate it, that whatever that means to you, hiking mountains, looking for tubes. That's about it. Honestly, that's a good life to me. That's what I've loved since I was a little boy. And to this very day, it's still the absolute top of my pyramid.
What about you, Lauren? I'm curious about that question for you. I haven't heard someone ask you that.
Lauren?
Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah.
I always feel like such a redneck when you say my name. Sunshine and clean water and watching your loved ones catch waves, and then having that full flush of salty ocean through your body, and then getting to just eat beautiful food. That's it for me. That's just pinnacle existence.
Yep.
And I'll take it day after day after day.
I knew you were going to say food. I was like, is food going to be first, second, or third? But you finished with last. So, all right. Yeah, of course, good food. Yeah, Italian food.
Yes.
There's one topic that we didn't get to talk about that I'd love to talk about briefly, and that is your relationship with Gene.
Oh, Uncle Gino.
Can you tell us who Gene was and give us a couple of the greatest hits of his teachings that you carry on and that you've implemented since you've been here?
Okay. Uncle Gene, geez. Maggie and I were just we found out we're having our son, and then we were instantly like, we have to get land. We have to get out of the city. We got to like raise our children in nature. Let's change the whole story. And so that was our push. And somehow through all of it, Maggie, really. She had the vision, and we found Uncle Gene. And Uncle Gene and Larry were a partnership. And I don't know how it all happened, but we ended up partnering with Gene on this beautiful piece of land. And he ended up becoming, it was just, I always tripped on it, but he became like, at the time, for that 5 years, he became like one of my best buds. Like, he was Uncle Gino, right? So he was really one of my greatest mentors. He was a genius. He was literally a genius, like employed by the US government, and he was an electrical engineer. And there was nothing I ever saw put in front of him that, and I'm talking really complex stuff, that he wouldn't take one. He'd always say, give me the night and we'll talk in the morning. I'm like, all right. we talk in the morning, and he said, well, here's the schematics. And I've ran this calculation over this. And then I went to my library and went through this, and I figured it out. It's all right there. And so he could just figure anything out. And he ran our well association, didn't have a doctorate in water or anything, but successfully would blow like the well drillers and all the well people's minds with all his engineering, just engineered his life, full spectrum. And basically he just taught me how to manage a, country existence without having to always rely on someone else, which was such a blessing. And he also had the most witty humor and the best stories. He was a mountaineer, and he was just such a lovely man. And he blessed my family so deeply. And I am so grateful for the time I spent with Gene, just quiet time out in the forest, working on water and working on engines and just all sorts of things. He obviously really drove in like that steadfast, do what you say and lead with, deeds, not words. Like he just did things, and he always put the community and his friends and his family before him, almost to a fault at some point. But that man was so giving. He gifted people with so much energy and help over the course of his 86 years that I don't know if I've ever seen anyone quite like that before. It was just next level. He never expected anything in return from it. It was just because he wanted to gift people with his knowledge that he had downloaded through this life. And that was so beautiful. And then he also had such a great way of, even though he was just absurdly smart, like blew everybody's mind who would ever have the gift of kind of touching into his brain waves. They would always just be like, oh my goodness. But we'd have him over to a barbecue and always include him. And he got a second lease. He never had children. So it was like we were his kids at the end of his life. And he got to have the whole family with the parties, and the whole deal is so beautiful. And he would just say the most funny things. Like, people would hear the folklore of Gene and ask questions like, in your 86 years of life, do you have something you could part on a young, man like me to, for the next level? He says, and he would get all serious and start, oh yeah, okay, yeah. One thing you'd always really want to consider is like, if you're ever cleaning the toilet, just keep your mouth shut. And they would just, like look, and then it would just be hysterical laughter. And he just always had this way about him to just keep things light and funny, even if you are a genius and you're, just to make life fun. And to his last day, he was just such a great man, and he just loved life. He loved learning, and he really showed me how healthy, if you take care of yourself, you can be until your 80s. He was still like rappelling down mountains with chainsaws up until his last year of battling melanoma. And I constantly was having to tell him, Gene, be careful. But like, one slip off of here. And he's like, well, you can't stop me. It's what I love. And he did. He loved it. He loved being a wild man, and he was. And he was so good to us.
It seems like he was really one of the benefactors of your family. He took a chance and let you all, a young family, you all buy into his land, and now he's passed away, and you were with him in his final moments of life.
Yeah, I was. It was such a honor to be chosen to be with him. He decided to take his own life, and I back that decision to this day. I checked in with him the entire time about it, and it was his call, and it really is a beautiful thing when someone's there and they're ready to go, to have that ability where it's not shamed and it's not done in a messy order where you can engineer it. He engineered his last songs, his last meal, and I was there to orchestrate it all. And it was so powerful. was a really, really huge chapter in my growth as a man, to be there for someone like that, and also juggle my family and their needs at the time. But I would never change any of it. It was he took a chance on us, we took a chance on him, and you know what it came down to? A handshake and eye contact and trusting someone you don't know, and that's big for me, really big. And how would I have ever known that would be one of my largest blessings ever? At the time, I didn't. I just had to trust. And so if you're out there and you feel like I can't do this and I can't do that, and I'll never be able to afford this, or just remember, so much of this existence comes down to like connecting with people and trusting in people, and really like being able to go there. And if you're overly guarded, which I can be, you could miss an opportunity like that, because financially we should have never been able to pull it off. But thanks to Uncle Gene and the handshake and the trust, it's like created a whole existence for us. So thanks, Uncle Gene. I love you, brother.
Thanks so much for listening with us today. If you like what you heard, please consider sharing an episode with a friend. Our editor this season is the multi-talented Ben Alexander. The podcast soundtrack was composed by Shannon Sol Carroll, with additional tunes by Dave and Ben. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcasts, and you can subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast, and more via our website, waterpeoplepodcasts.com.